I think I've asked this question a couple times before, so forgive me, but I'm going to keep asking it because I think it's an important question. But how many of you would feel 100% confident if someone came up to you and asked you to share the gospel with them? How many of you feel 100% confident? Yeah, I like asking this question because I think sometimes we take for granted what does it mean to share the gospel, or we think it's this big, grandiose task that is unachievable and only attainable by those who have spent 8 years or more in school like me. It's not true. Anyone can share the gospel with anybody. And I was working at a barbecue restaurant. I'm sure I've told you guys this before. One of the dishwashers came up to me and said this exact thing. He said, "In 1 minute, Blake, tell me the gospel. Tell me what you believe as a Christian." I did it in 2, but nonetheless, I still did it. Because sometimes I go long-winded on certain parts, and it's fine. But I believe this is one of the most challenging things for Christians today, to feel comfortable sharing their faith in a world where they feel like they're going to be persecuted, or when they get on their phone and they feel like everyone's always attacking them. So they don't want to risk being attacked in person as well. And so what I brought in front of you is the story of Scripture. If you got this handout, great. If not, there's going to be more out there. This is a tool, one tool that I use to share with people the gospel. What is it that Christians believe? And I'll be referencing parts of this as we even go through our lesson today in the parable. I'm going to use it because I think Jesus, in a really interesting way, talks about the entire story of the Bible. And talks about the beginning, middle, the end, all of these pieces: creation, rebellion, promise, redemption, mission, and restoration. All of them in this one parable. And it's the parable of the weeds. And the interesting thing about this parable is that Jesus actually explains it. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but most of the parables in the Bible don't get explained. As a matter of fact, there's only 2 that I found that there's actually an explanation for. First is the parable of the soil, which we read last week. And then this week, right, the parable of the weeds. It's the only 2 parables that I see an explanation where the disciples ask a question and Jesus answers with what this thing is all about. And the other interesting thing is Jesus doesn't explain this parable to everybody. He doesn't explain it to the crowd that he told it to. He explains it to the disciples, to the ones who asked what the meaning was, in private, separate away from them. And so I think it begs the question that maybe we need to pay even more attention. Because again, Jesus told his closest friends this parable. And so when we look at the parable today, I'm going to be asking these questions as we go through and answering them. But the questions that came to my mind are, why did Jesus only tell this to his disciples? And then what does this parable show us? And then the last question is, how do we respond then to the explanation that Jesus gives? So to find that out, let's first look at the field. We're going to look at verse 24 and verse 38a. 24, he put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field." 38, the field is the world. Jesus starts this parable with creation. In the beginning was God. He created all that was there. And in this field, he created everything. He created the heavens and the earth. Notice that in this moment, as he's talking to the crowd, he draws them into creation itself. And he starts with this man who sowed the good seed in the ground. And the ground here is assumed. Just like many of us assume creation in our own conversations, we often don't say, "Man, I thought about creation the first thing I woke up today, and I just wanted to talk about creation because that's what I thought about." We just kind of go through our lives assuming that this thing that we're on, this planet and everything, has just existed, and until you finally ask the question, right? Well, why? Where did this all come from? Why is it all here? God created all that we see, and all that God made was good, and all of it was to give him glory and praise and honor. He created the plants, the animals, the stars, the mountains, the rivers, all that we see and don't see, including the angels. And we'll get to them shortly. And notice, the field isn't just one particular area. He could have said that the soil is Israel. That's right. It's between this river and this river, between these two oceans, and here it's this grid points. He didn't say that. He didn't say the field is the United States. He didn't say the field is only the northern hemisphere. The field is the whole world. As always, Jesus is expanding his vision of salvation, not just to the Israelites, but to everyone. And eventually that would catch on in the New Testament. But we see his vision of this world, and salvation is for all of the world and for all of his creation. And now something bad happens in this parable. Let's look at verses 25 and 26, and then we'll also look at 38b and 39a. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. Rebellion happens. The fall happens. The wheat is now tainted by this weed. And both of them are now existing together, not only with the wheat, but it's also in the ground. It's affecting the very creation itself. Shortly after these good seeds are thrown out for a good produce, the enemy comes to kill and destroy. He puts out the weeds to destroy and choke out the plants, and Jesus is calling back to a previous parable a little bit, the parable of the soil where the thorns choked out the seed. But I think Jesus is doing something very clever here, and that any good evangelist must do. Jesus is contextualizing the gospel. See, at the time, there was a Roman law put in place that would punish anyone for doing this very thing. It was not totally uncommon that a rival farmer might sow these darnel seeds into a rival's field to choke out their crops and kill it so that he might have a better return on his field. But if that man was ever found, the Roman Empire would punish him. And I don't think Jesus wasn't talking about darnel seeds specifically, but the analogy was there. People would have understood what he was talking about. Jesus used an image everyone and anyone at the time would understand to help them understand the good news, to help him proclaim the gospel to people at that time. So who's this enemy of the farmer? It's the devil. Satan, the great tempter, and his legion of demons. This has been the enemy ever since the garden that has struck rebellion against God. Eve was tempted by his words and his cunning wit away from God, bringing sin into the whole world. He sows seeds of doubt, seeds of destruction, seeds of pride, seeds of lust, seeds of anger. The enemy will use whatever he can to choke out the fruit that can grow from the ground. Now, there are these weeds in the ground, and something must be done, right? Something has to be done. I want to look at first verses 26 through 30 before we get to the explanation. Let's start in 26. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seeds in the field? How then does it have weeds?" He said to them, "An enemy has done this." So the servants said to him, "Then do you want us to go and to gather them?" But he said, "No, lest the gathering of the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." Looking at this, you can't help sympathize with these workers or servants or slaves. There is something wrong. The slaves have been hired. They want to help their master fix the problem, so they want to go. But the master tells them no, for a couple of reasons. But one sticks out to me more than the other. First, like a good farmer, the master knows his crops. He knows that if the weeds get pulled too soon, the good ones will come up with it. The harvest will be totally destroyed if they pluck the weeds now. They must grow. The wheat must get stronger. But his second reason is probably confusing, because it took me a while thinking about it to to catch up to with what Jesus was saying. But the second reason is this: the reapers will come. Jesus, in this moment, draws a distinct line between his servants and the reapers. The servants need not worry about the final harvest. Either they've done a good job already by helping the master sow the seeds, or they have been faithful by taking on whatever other task the master had for them. The reapers, however, are in charge of helping with the harvest. They are the ones, when the time is right, to gather up the weeds and burn them. And then once that's done, to gather up the wheat. Before I go on, let's remind ourselves of who these reapers are again. This is starting in 39b. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of the kingdom all causes of sin and lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. The reapers are the angels. I remember being in a conversation with someone earlier this week, and they've been constantly reminded of the angels and their prayers and their study and their time, because we often forget about them. We don't think about them because they're that unseen reality, that unseen creation that is always working for God on our behalf. We're so fast to forget that there are legions and legions of angels in this world fighting for us. Even now, as we sit around here, angels are around us. They're out there fighting, defending, helping, preserving sanctuaries. Who stands guard of this place when no one's here? The angels. And even in our liturgy, we get a glimpse of their role. Right? Therefore, we praise you, joining our voices with angels and archangels, and with all the company of heaven who forever sing this hymn to proclaim the glory of your name. We join in this heavenly chorus that has started before we even existed and will continue to go on to the end of the age and even into eternity. But the image is that when the time is right, the angels will be sent. Not just with messages, but actually with a sword. And the weeds that are going to be pulled are not going to be used to anyone or anything, so they must be burned. I'm sure that if you were a farmer at the time and you had these darnel seeds and the wheat seeds, and when it came right to pick and pull them apart and see what you could gather and harvest and what you needed to throw away, you would actually maybe use the darnel to feed your animals. And seems like a good use of that. But no, not in God's kingdom. Those weeds represent the evil in this world. They have no good at all for anyone or anything. So the only thing left to do with it is to gather all of those weeds and to burn them. To burn them so that when the weeds have been pulled out and after the smoke clears, the remaining wheat will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. There's judgment coming. But redemption is also happening. The restoration of all things is coming. In just a couple of paragraphs, Jesus gives us the whole story of the Bible, again, for all of us to hear. That he is right in the middle of it. He's bringing about redemption through his life and through his death and through his resurrection. And he's going to be the one leading people to that restoration. And he looks for that and he tells them there is judgment coming. This is not just to show the whole story, but to teach us several things. I think first and foremost, what this parable teaches us is a lot about the character of God. Just listen to these few verses, and you might understand what I mean. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:22 and 23. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. Let Israel say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his steadfast love endures forever. You can even look at our psalm today. But you, O Lord God, are full of compassion and mercy, long-suffering, plenteousness in goodness and truth. The master of the house, the master of the field, the Son of Man, hates to see that his field has been tainted with such evil. He cannot stand it. He actually came to fix it as well. But the master of the house is patient, and he knows exactly when the harvest is ready. And when it is, he's willing to do what it takes to rid the world of evil once and for all, so that the field, the world, will be a place where there is no more pain and no more suffering and no more tears. He's the only one who knows the time. And we must believe that his ways are better than my ways, that his thoughts are not my thoughts. The second thing this parable teaches us is that the burden of judgment is on him. God knows that we cannot judge correctly. We talked about this last week. This is why he never puts judgment into our hands. Our judgment has been tainted through sin entering the world. Right? This is why he says we are not to condemn one another. We are not to cast judgment on someone. God is the final judge. That instead we turn them to forgiveness, to repentance, to righteousness, to right way of living, but we do not condemn them. Because again, his thoughts are higher than my thoughts, and his ways are higher than my ways. He is willing to be more patient, more loving, and more merciful, and more kind to my enemies than I ever would be. And I think this question from N.T. Wright is helpful for us to think about this kind of judgment in a different way. Would people really like it if God were to rule the world directly and immediately, so that our every thought and action were weighed and instantly judged, and if necessary, punished in the scales of his absolute holiness? Do we really want that? Or do we want his mercy because we know we fail as well? I'm not sure about you, but I'm grateful that God is merciful and kind and patient and loving with me, and that he shows me his mercies are new every morning. Lord, help us to be patient with ourselves and with our enemies, the ones you love. The third thing this parable teaches us is that God has a different work for us. In the parable, the slaves ask the master, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" I can't help but sympathize with the slaves and the servants in this, asking the question. That's the humanist response within me. If there's a problem, and I have the power to fix it, then I must be the one to fix the problem. It is my job to do it. I can do it. I can accomplish this thing. And I'm sure the slaves knew how to pick the weeds apart from the wheat, and the slaves who worked the field at the time knew well, but it's not their job. In this parable, we don't get to see what the workers do. But let me remind you again of another parable just before, as we read a few weeks ago. Then he said to the disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." I said this when I preached on this several weeks ago, but maybe Jesus responds to the disciples in this way, specifically to encounter the humanistic tendencies within their hearts and minds, thinking that they can do it all. Fourth, we need to contextualize the gospel always. While the relevance of the gospel never changes, it does need to find new forms to match the age. Just like water getting poured into several different vases of all shapes and sizes, so is the gospel to its culture. In a world that is filled with moral relativism, the truth will set them free. It is inescapable that all of us will go before Jesus on Judgment Day and have to stand before our Creator. The questions of what makes a good person and who determines it is of utmost importance in our time to be able to answer for other people and to remind them that there is no one good except for Jesus and to point them that way. We must learn how to show this world that every person is affected by sin and that no matter how righteous they appear on the outside, they cannot escape the clutches of sin. And it's not just the culture that does it, but it's because there's sin in their own heart that makes them turn in on themselves. They need to see that creation itself was not spared from the consequences, and it too groans with pain, waiting to be released from the powers of sin, and we have a part in that. In a world that's filled with humanistic religion and philosophy, we need God to show up in miraculous ways. We need to hear more testimonies of people who have completely changed their life because of God and not because of their own strength. We need to be more transparent with ourselves and with one another with the ways we try to push back sin using our own might. We are so fast to forget that the weed is growing right with the wheat to the end of the age. As our lives are changed to be more in line with God, we will always need to seek more and more of God's faithfulness and mercy and love and compassion so that we can continue to proclaim it to more and more people all around the world. And that kind of change and that kind of praise will have an impact on our neighbors. Finally, we need to pray for patience while maintaining our urgency. Trust that God is in control. Trust that He is in control, that we might not see even a week ahead of now. That we might not be able to understand what is going on, but that we need to trust Him and that He knows exactly when to come because He is patient, long-suffering. The Israelites waited hundreds of years for their Messiah, and sometimes in silence. We're no different than them. We too must trust that God is in the in-between and wait for Him to enact His final judgment. And yet with urgency, to continue to proclaim the gospel that Tom and Bob and Matt and Arlo and people I know could hear the gospel and that their lives could be changed forever and that they too could be saved. That God would have mercy on these people. And in the meantime, with non-anxious urgency, proclaim the gospel far and wide that Jesus saves.